For our next 5 minutes panel. So now you guys know what's going on, ladies and gentlemen, is we're going to have 3 different speakers do a 5-minute passion talk, and then we're going to ask them questions. We actually find this to be far more interactive than a panel of people sitting there passing a mic down, each answering the same question. I find that to be not the best experience. So this really allows us to get to know our panelists. So I'll let Trish do the introductions.
On? Yes? Oh, that is on. So welcome back. I hope everyone had a great lunch. First up in our panel, we've got Rodney Mano coming here from Spin Master. He's the Senior Director of HR for Canada. Did I get that right? Yeah. And a fun fact about Rodney, a huge Toronto Raptors fan. He didn't jump on the bandwagon recently. He always has been. But the recent win has his basement full of all sorts of awesome paraphernalia and things. So bring up our Raptors fan. Here you go, Rodney.
Okay, I'm gonna. Okay, perfect. So I'm going to be scared of the cowbells going off and causing me to stop. So I'm going to try to move through this as quickly as possible. First and foremost, I wanted to open up by saying, I just think some of the dialogue relative to the discussions and all the feedback you all have in the room has been amazing, especially for me, based on the topic I'm going to speak about. I'm going to open by saying I'm not going to ground what I'm going to speak about in data. Okay, so it's going to be about kind of the observations I've had over time based on the experiences and conversations I've had and or with peers about their experiences in different organizations when it comes to change, specifically when it comes to culture and the role that leaders play in how that is interpreted by those who do work every day. So here's a general definition. But I really want to lean in on point number 2, and that's, those behaviors that managers or leadership, they kind of conduct, or that others that interpret or receive those behaviors, how they receive what, how the leadership behaves. Really and truly, I think that's what helps define culture in a company, much more than words on a page or what we paint on our walls or a mission and vision statement. It comes down to how our leaders behave and how they treat those that they lead. So I'm sure you're very familiar with Maya Angelou, great poet, memoirist, civil rights activist. And this quote came up when we were launching a business. It was an incredibly aggressive startup that I was a part of. And we had the opportunity to build this from scratch. And our head of marketing shared this quote with me while we were trying to establish the employment brand. And what really stood out for me when I saw this is it really comes down to how do we trigger emotion within the employee group or those that do work every day, and how do they receive us and how we feel. And whatever we commit to relative to our employee brand or what we want to market or put on our website, we actually have to commit to it. So if those things aren't going to be defined in what we do, then we shouldn't say it to employees or prospective employees. We should commit to what we believe we can actually do. So for me, when I think about kind of what I'll speak about, it's about accuracy in how we promote our brands, our culture, our mission, vision, values to the general public so that when people start working for us, they're not surprised by what they actually get. So what's the role of human resources? By show of hands in the room, if you have human resources, people, learning, training, talent in your title, anything along that lines, how many people are in the space? So quite a few people are here that are in the space. First and foremost, kudos to you. You have a really tough gig. We deal with people and translating their needs and trying to align them with what's happening in the business. That's incredibly difficult to do. So specifically, when I think about HR organizations, I want to lean in on this role of the HR business partner. And I want to let you know what my definition of what that role is versus what I do see the role, how I see it set up in certain organizations. So the role of the HR business partner, from my perspective, is truly a representative of the business. So they're a representative of what the business, what matters to the business, what's important to the business, and they then translate those needs to the broader HR function. So they translate what's happening in the business to the broader group. a lot of times what I see is HR, the business partner, is a plug in the business for the HR agenda. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is it's important for the HR function to be very close and understand what's happening in the business, because when we identify what's going wrong or leaders that aren't living up to the values, our relationship's gonna allow us to change and influence that. Here's a quick slide, and I'm at 53 seconds, about, on the left side, it's things that we typically do. On the right side, I have HR business partner there just because of how you might use that role in your current organizations. But a lot of the other things you see here are discussion based. And this is one thing I like about Thoughtexchange and what's happening in the room today is it's a lot of discussion. I think this is really important. It's one thing to get directional feedback, is another thing to have a dialogue. And I think that on the right side of this perspective slide, you see the importance of dialogue. Speaking about that setup, so if we receive the dialogue, we understand what's happening, we may be not living up to the values. What's important from the realm of human resources, if this business partner is you, if this business partner is someone on your team that reports to you, ask the question, are they an inch deep, a mile wide? So I'm almost done. So are they an inch deep, a mile wide? Do they mean a little something to everyone, but nothing to anyone really? When I think about our ability to actually quarterback change and motivate change in an organization, it's grounded in our trusting relationship, and that will drive our ability to influence those who exhibit the behaviors that we don't want to see. So what we really need to be is an inch wide, a mile deep. These people can't be replaced. So when I think about the weight we carry on our shoulders, leading the people agenda, it's really important that our relationship is paramount. Because then when we have to approach the conversations that nobody else wants to have in the organization, or nobody else wants to get in the room with the brilliant asshole, when we do it, we have a deep relationship there, and the odds are they're gonna listen to us. So in conclusion, it really comes down to, we're in a business of dealing with employees, emotions, how people feel. The biggest group that swings that vote are really your leaders, primarily executives. If they live and exhibit the values, things will be great. So do what you say and say what you do. This is what I live by, and you know, I consider myself the person who will have those conversations when they need to happen. And then wrap up, I think this was a brilliant quote from the CEO of Disney. I'd love, if you ever run a thought exchange at Disney, I'd love to see what employees have to say about the quote. Thank you.
Oh, there's Anil. So Anil Samuel is up next with CIBC, and he's the Senior Director of Talent Development there. And I cornered him to ask a little fun fact about him before he came up here, and he's learning to master the art of barbecue, and it's gonna go all the way through winter. So if anyone's got some hot tips for him, please share after that. Come on up, thanks.
Thank you, Trish. Thank you. Perfect. Pause and think through before you press start. This one right here to go. All right, perfect. So thank you, Thoughtexchange, for you can start. So thank you, Thoughtexchange, for inviting me to speak. I actually, unfortunately, I missed the first half of this entire event. I got called into a meeting, and it was a 2-hour HR meeting. It was brutal. So hopefully I got a little bit of energy here to talk through what I wanted to talk through for today. I'm going to be honest with you, I don't have a lot of slides. But I will compensate by displaying just random babies and puppies and kittens, just so I could try to emotionally engage you in the next 4.5 minutes here. But really, I don't need that many slides. I just really want to share a story, and that story is going to start with this guy. And if you're wondering who is this guy here, that is me. 6 years ago, younger, skinnier, probably less hairier person. But I remember when I took this picture. It was 6 years ago. I just took a new role at CIBC where I met. I took a director role at CIBC. And when you go to a director role, you kind of get into this bucket of being in this senior leadership group. And why this is important here is enough of me. I don't want my picture. There's another baby over here. Why it's important is that I kind of reflect back in the last 6 years of all the different roles that I've taken, all the different people I've met, and I kind of look at those 6 years, and then I kind of rewind back to the 4 years prior to that, when just before that picture was taken, not this one, the one before that was taken, and of all the changes that were happening, there's one thing that stayed consistent. There's one story that stayed consistent for the last 10 years, and that was the story of our employee survey, our annual employee survey. And those of you who are in kind of the corporate space probably have the same story that I have, right? So an employee survey goes out, everyone fills it out, and then the management team is all excited, to see the results because they get to brag about how great of a manager they are and show off to their peers. And then we get the strengths over here, and we kind of put those aside because those are good. We don't have to worry about those. And then we kind of get the opportunities on this side, and then the leadership team dives in, right? They dive in. They start thinking about all these ideas of how do we close the gap. Collaboration is low, so let's start a monthly call and invite all the teams to share best practices. Or recognition is low, so let's start Thank You Tuesdays and say thank you to everybody, every Tuesday. And you come up with compensation is always low, but nobody cares about that because it's always low. It's true, right? I don't even know why it's on the survey, but then we famously start a task force, right? Like an action team, that takes all these ideas, and a bunch of people get together and they meet on a regular basis and communicate all these really cool things that they're gonna do. And then work gets in the way, right? Work gets in the way, and that pile of paper on the side of their desk starts getting bigger and bigger. They're not meeting as often. Communication starts, and things kind of fizzle out. And soon enough, next year's survey comes out, and then we start scratching our heads like, wait a minute, how come we just kind of fell flat, right? Like people aren't really resonating with all that. We had action task force and everything, and it didn't make any sense. And I look at something like this, and I kind of go back to that picture, right? I go back to that picture, and I think about, what did I really think about the employee survey at that time? And if that second question was really on the survey at that time, I think I would actually put strongly agree on there. And I think I would put strongly agree on there because I've heard the same story over and over and over. I put the dog up there, right? It's just, and I just hear it over and over again, right? We hear the same stories from our leaders all the time. So this year, in the 1 minute that I have left here, this year something triggered, right? Something just kind of, triggered me, and for the first time in 11 years of being in the bank, I finally put up my hand, and I realized, that I became that leader that I didn't want to be when it came to the employee survey. I became the leader that made the 6 years ago person that I was not like the employee survey. And I actually spoke up, and I said, we've been doing the same survey many years, spent a lot of money on this, and I'm not here to play down on the survey. I think the survey is actually incredibly important. I think, but it's a starting point, and I think we got to do more. I think we're gonna have to ask more questions and be more detailed. So I raised my hand, I voiced my opinion, and said, let's. You stop the time? Oh, I was like, yeah, and so I lost my train of thought. Yeah, so I voiced my opinion to say let's just change it up a bit, right? Let's ask more questions. What collaboration to me is different. What collaboration means to you, right? And let's really understand what are our employees actually thinking, because one of the reasons why our action plans don't work is that you can't action plan collaboration or recognition. It's too broad, right? We got to really dive deep, and we got to make our employees be part of the solution as well. Let's ask them what advice they need. There shouldn't be a bunch of leaders, sitting around in a boardroom making all these decisions. I'm not saying I'm anti-leader, but really, why are we making the decisions without really asking the question to our employees? I truly believe, I know I'm over time, but I truly believe that we got to get back to the purpose of that employee survey. That employee survey, is not a pulse check to see if our employees are engaged. The employee survey, the purpose of the employee survey is to improve employee engagement at the end of the day. That's the purpose of the employee survey. We got to get back to that. And I'm hoping that I can get everyone on LinkedIn at the cocktail thing tonight, and next year share the story that a couple of little changes like this actually improved employee engagement. And If it doesn't, then I will be reaching out to you on LinkedIn, probably to look for a new job. So thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks, Anil. And next up, Tim's in the room here. Tim Magwood's coming up. He is CEO and also co-founder, sole founder? Co-founder, okay, of One Degree Inc., who's working with organizations on their culture. So I'm looking forward to hearing what he has to say. Fun fact, he doesn't know I'm going to share this one, but we were chatting at dinner last night, and I found out that he took jazz dance for a while secretly in university. And it's got some moves apparently. So come on up. No, I won't make you dance. Don't worry.
Thanks, Trish. It's funny, I don't normally share that with many people, Trish. And somehow you created the psychologically safe space for me to share that. I really appreciate it. So great to be here with, and in fact, my topic fits in beautifully with Anil and who's the first the name? Rodney, there you are. Rodney and Anil fits in beautifully. So I don't have any slides. I've got 0. So my talk is around heartfulness, which is a critical movement in life and in workplace today. So I just want to start with a quote. Some of you may have heard this, but this quote landed for me when I heard it a few weeks ago for a second time. You know, you hear certain quotes and it's just like, wow. So the Confucius quote, which is, we have 2 lives, and we realize we have 2 lives, and the second one begins when we realize we only have 1. Yeah, it just landed for me big time a couple weeks ago because I was in a car accident in July, and I've had a few incidents. I've had 3 in my life where it's like my life could have been over. So a quick story is I'm 50. I just turned 50 this year. And 10 years ago, thank you. Any other 50-year-olds in the house? Any other 50-year-olds? Yeah, so I'm not the oldest guy, but you know, I'm one of the eldest in the room now, so I feel like a really youthful 50-year-old. So I started or co-founded 4 businesses, 2 failures in my 20s, and I had 1 big success in my 30s, and in One Degree is the fourth business, which is working well. But I ran really hard in my 30s. Started a business called Fusion Learning. Started it, founded it in 2000. Big run into 2010, and I sold the business to partners, internal partners. And so my wife and I decided to go celebrate. So we went to Peru. Had a great time. We came back early 2011, and some weird shit started to happen to me. I started to have a little trouble swallowing. It got worse. Tried to get some tests, didn't know what it was. And finally, I got diagnosed with something called achalasia, which is an autoimmune disorder. So we all have a nerve in our neck that tells our sphincter muscle here between the esophagus and stomach to open and close. Well, this got frayed. It stopped working, so I had a permanently clogged drain. So I had to get a procedure called the Heller myotomy, where they go in laparoscopically in a few places and they re-architect how the esophagus interplays with the stomach. Yeah, it was crazy, and I had about 6 months of recovery. This was when I just turned 40. I thought it was a parasite or something like that, but upon reflection, what I realized is I had run way too hard for 10, 12 years as an entrepreneur. So how many of you feel like you run too hard in work? I think we've got a chronic stress problem in life and in workplace today. And I was part of that movement. I was part of that drive, and not taking care of myself. So after I sold the business, I tried to figure out what was next, and I decided I was going to co-create a culture agency so that we could take care of people and create meaningful, heartful workplaces. So you all have a handout here, and the big idea is this notion of leading a heartful life at home, work, and at play. And you'll see that there's a model, a framework. I'm not going to go over all this, but some of you may have a courage quote. Some of you may have a collaborate quote. So take which one resonates with you. But at its essence is this: we must lead and live more from heart, because our heart is the organ that says, that's the most intelligent organ in our body, that says this is the right thing to do, or we live too much in our heads. Can anybody relate to that? How many of you would say you live more in your head versus your heart? I'm putting my hand up. So how do we tap into the hearts of ourselves and the heart intelligence of each other so that we can stay healthy and do meaningful work? So at the heart of the heartful model is this heart set. I think we're mindful enough. I'm a mindful practitioner, but we're all mindful enough. So how do we have a heart set? And maybe one thing I'll point to in there that says appreciate versus expect. I think we expect too much as leaders. So how do we appreciate the moment, appreciate each other, appreciate the journey versus I expect? The expectation place is hard. It's push. It's hard on the heart. So how do we appreciate versus expect? And so there's some presence in heart set. There's connect, which is the ability to just listen, tune in to ourselves, tune into each other, tap into intuition, which really I think lives in the heart. So if we've got that figured out, then we can go to the next piece, which is courage. Courage, my word, right? Great tune by the Tragically Hip. Courage, en français, cool, great stuff in Brené Brown. You've all read her stuff. How do we be more courageous? Go up in a skinny branch, as Des talked about. How do we go out on that skinny branch and take risks and experiment? That's courage. And there's been lots of courage in this room so far. There's cause. The cause is the why. Simon Sinek says, he talks about cause. We have our own whys. What is that? Why am I on the planet? Why should anybody care? And how do you link your why to the why of your organization? That's where there's energy. How do we make that alignment or that connection? Cause. And then we have collaborate, work from this we space. That's heart, not me space. That's head. And finally, we want to be able to coach. The super heart skill, help others be their best. So please tap into your hearts, more from versus your head, and lead so we can have a more meaningful, heartful existence. Now, call to action. I'd like you to look at one of these and just say in your head, I will commit to one of these so that, what's the benefit for you? I will commit to this more so that, what's the benefit? I want you to turn to a partner. Last thing, 15 seconds. Turn to your partner. So I've totally committed to this. I'm excited about this as it relates to heartfulness. Turn to a partner. Just go for that. What's that commitment? What's the takeaway around heartfulness, leading a heartful life? Go. That's easy for the extroverts. The introverts are thinking more about it. Thank you very much.
All right, we're going to jump into another exchange right now and put in any thoughts or questions for Rodney, Anil, and Tim. And I'll invite all three of you back up here to come and sit on the panel.
So I always love to do the real-time top thoughts and see what we get here. So Tim, it's for you. How do you get traditional conservative, non-feeling execs, the ones that are robots, to still think, because they still think it's fluff. And they look they look at ROI and they say, "Where's my ROI?"
Yeah, I work with CEOs day in and day out. Come on, they don't exist. Come on. How many of you know the body of work, Firms of Endearment? Has anybody read that book?
No.
Okay, so go buy it or do. There's lots of book summaries on Firms of Endearment. I'll give you the 30-second synopsis. A study over 15 years, between 2003 and 2018, I think 15 years. Comparing firms of endearment, 30 companies, all American, that are vision, values driven, put employees first. So companies like Costco, Patagonia, Google, and they outperformed the good to great companies 6-1 and the S&P 15-1. So if you can make the relationship between heartfulness and caring for your people, so a lot of CEOs don't get this frickin' thesis. They need to get it. And this is one of my pitches. It's this thesis. Put your people, it's really simple and you know this. Put your people first, create a great employee experience. That will translate into a great guest experience or a client experience, which directly impacts the bottom line and way outperforms good to great or S&P. So if you put employees first, then the next piece is, well, you have to care for them. Are we aligned on that? So caring and heartfulness is what fuels employee experience, which it fuels client experience, which drives shareholder value. So I think if you use that language and if you give them a body of work like Firms of Endearment, they'll get it rationally, get to the heart through the head. Mm-hmm. Get to the heart through the head, and then they're like frickin' apple pie.
Well, it's interesting. I was at a CFO conference where I met Jasmine a couple weeks ago. And so CFOs, just, great crowd. Haha, you're allowed to laugh. And so I said that the CFOs, whenever I get in front of any group like that, I know what they're going to say is like, what's the ROI on this? So my comment to them is, I find it kind of interesting that you want me to quantify the cost of human suffering.
That's good.
Yeah, they laughed. Even they laughed. Yeah, they actually laugh. But it was because it is, we're always challenged with this question, and yet it's so obvious. But how do you provoke that discussion that's really just an excuse to not have the conversation?
And give us some data. Give us some data on it.
Yeah.
Whatever, however you do that, give us some data on the suffering.
So, Anil, what have you found that best closes the loop? Share some of the actions that you've taken.
So I think I talked a little bit about it, but it's communication really. I mean, I know this is not, I'm not plugging Thoughtexchange, but really we use Thoughtexchange for kind of a follow up to our employee sat or our employee survey, and our action plan on this is that it's not a one-time activity, right? So what came out of the employee surveys was a number of different themes, and then with those themes we go back on a monthly basis back to our employees. And with Thoughtexchange, there's some great analytics that are in the back end that we can actually easily share. I think what's important is what we look at is that all the thoughts are actually shared. And how we've kind of really integrated it is that when we are communicating, it's not communicating on this is what we're going to do based on the thoughts. We've already come up with some actions that we're going to do in the short term right away, and lead with that and say these are the actions that we are taking or that we have taken. What is the progress of that? And then what's next, right? We're going to do another exchange in a week, and we're going to continue this cycle. And we do this on a regular basis. It's not there's a question out there about this is not an annual activity where we just do it one time and then it loses its flavor. We got to just continuously keep people engaged, people in the loop of what we're doing. And I think that's what makes them feel heard, right? Is that we're not just collecting data, is that we're actioning data. And that's pretty much how we've been doing it. And like I said, I'll let you know next year how it all turns out.
Thanks. This one came up a few times as well, Rodney. How do you manage priorities when you're trying to be an inch wide and a mile deep? How does that work?
That's a really great question. I would say when I think about if those priorities don't contribute to really influencing those who swing the majority vote in your organization, I wonder how much of a priority they really are. So I'll give you an example. So in my world, I find that I'm torn with a lot of things that I consider highly important, low perceived value. So what would be an example of that? If any of you were in payroll, no discredit, payroll is incredibly important. The issue is in the eyes of employees, it's low perceived value. No one comes up to me and shakes my hand that they were paid on Friday. So it's that busy work that we need to think about. How do we manage some of that busy work to allow individuals like myself to be able to sit down with, say, an executive who isn't the best version of themselves often. So for me, it's about really asking myself what the priority is, and I'll kind of, I will send some things to the side if it means allowing me the opportunity to deal with the thing that carries the most influence. So for me, it starts at the top, and whatever I could do to influence that group to be the best versions of themselves in the workplace, that has a very high perceived value and very important. So that's the way I kind of organize priorities.
Mm-hmm. So next question here. Tim, there's a lot of questions about this heartfelt organization. I think there's excitement about it, but a question or skepticism of how do you get it to work in a large organization? Where would you start?
So I lead a culture transformation business. This heartfulness concept is a brand new concept I'm testing on you. I've only delivered this to one group, so this concept is new. But in terms of where I would start in an organization, we do a lot of work around purpose. So how many of your organizations would have not a mission, not a vision, but a higher purpose, a why? I'm just curious, how many organizations have a clearly articulated why? Okay, so start there. So cause. So go have conversations about what people's whys are. What's your personal purpose? Why do you do what you do? and go have conversations about the organizational why. And I find that if we create conversations about why, it creates meaning, which is at the heart of heartfulness for me. It's the why. If we can't articulate why we're doing something, there's energy that's missing. So go have why conversations is where I would start.
Thanks. Anil, this is the wind tree, a monkey wind tree question. So this is a tough one.
Yeah, I missed that presentation.
Oh, you missed the wind tree.
I heard it in Vancouver, though.
Yes, you know the wind tree. So are yearly employee engagement surveys even relevant anymore? Change happens so fast that can action planning even address it? So is this something left over from a past time that we're still holding on to in organizations? It's a big one.
Great question, and I'll give you the non-HR answer to that. My opinion on this is that it is an archaic practice that we call it an annual employee survey, and we see a lot of these changes happening now in a lot of organizations, even with our with performance reviews, right? Where we have an annual performance reviews, and those are being eliminated as well. Once a year or 2 times a year, you have to your mid-year check. Those are all being eliminated. And really the idea around that is that we can't think of things now at a moment in time. There's so many different factors that will influence that employee survey. If we had a market shift in May and our survey was in June, or it was layoffs happening, there's so many different factors that it doesn't really give you a true picture. So what we definitely are seeing more and more now is these pulse checks that are happening, right? So maybe 2 or 3 times during the year you'll have a few different pulse checks just to gauge and see where we at, and then what do we need to do to improve. And that's the big part, right? And I kind of mentioned that in the presentation. Like we can't think of it as a pulse check. Okay, this is where we're at and we're good. It's always thinking about how do we improve. So in my presentation I talked about the strengths that you kind of put to the side, and those are good. We don't have to worry about that, but those are the things that you still need to improve on. We can't forget about those types of things. Is it relevant? I do believe that there's relevance to it. There's a lot of value that does come from the questions that are asked from those surveys. There's a lot of things that really kind of guide not just the employees, but the leaders and the organization, where the organization stands as well. But I think it's not enough, right? It's not enough that we just put something out there and we think that's it. I think it's all the work that happens in between Pulse Check 1 and Pulse Check 2, right? And all the engagement and the accountability that the leaders need to have and the employees need to have to action and make things actual and see change happen. Will it go away? Maybe. You read a lot of articles now, but that these employee surveys are kind of fizzling out. But we also hear more of the research that more tools are coming out where you can do more of a deeper dive rather than the standard Likert scale, strongly agree. So I think in time, I think it'll evolve. The employee survey will evolve, and we'll get a lot more meaningful data and use that data.
Okay, I know Tim has 10 seconds, and then I have the last question for Rodney.
Stop engagement surveys. Stop. Stop the insanity, people. Read Lance Seckerton's new book called The Bellwether Effect. Stop things that aren't working. Performance reviews annually, one way, stop. Engagement reviews, stop. Engagement scores have got worse over the last 30, 40 years. Look for what you can stop. That's one of them. Stop.
Right. And last quick question, Rodney. Those HR business partners, how can they drive change from those executives that are really hard to change?
I spoke about the importance of the relationship. And I think if we all said to ourselves, there's probably one, I'm gonna define it because this has really stuck with me since this conference, is that concept of the brilliant asshole. So there's probably one of those in all of your lives right now. So the $1 million question to ask yourself is, if it was you or maybe someone that reports to you that had to sit in front of that person and say, hey, you're brilliant, but you're an asshole, how would that conversation go? And would that individual listen to you because they believe in you having their best interest at mind? Or would they say, hey, I see you once a week, maybe once a month. You speak to my team every so often, appreciate your perspective, but if I need something from you, I'll send you an email or I'll call you. Mm-hmm. And, that's why for me, I've come across these individuals in my career, and I've done everything I can to just build an incredibly trusting relationship, starting with really understanding their world and seeing the world through their lens first. And I do it at the detriment of my own work-life balance. I become infatuated with trying to just understand their world so that when we dialogue, I'm not a visitor in their home, but I'm a family member almost. That's how I'm treated. And that's the only way that I've found that is successful in my ability to tell that brilliant asshole how they're being received by the rest of their teams and or the organization. If I'm an inch deep, a mile wide, that conversation never goes well.
That was beautiful. Thank you. Thank you.